The film opens with Joe Kavanaugh passionately narrating his experiences at the Alcoholics Anonymous meeting. He vividly describes how he was reluctantly dragged into the meetings, emphasizing the point of how he ended up there, despite being a big alcoholic. He introduces himself, stating that he has been sober for 5 years at that time and now has to get through the 12 steps. Joe, though initially reluctant, is grateful for being sober for a long time, attributing it to the help he has received. Joe bangs on the door, claiming he is a cop, and shouts convincingly as if there is a police raid. This causes the men to be spooked, and they spring out of the room via the windows, sprinting and jumping over the walls in panic. However, when Joe makes himself known, the men realize it's just Joe, their coach. Despite being pissed off for stirring the hornet's nest, they get back to the room, and Joe casually chills with a stick between his lips. Joe gathers the boys into the van, but the men are upset because their uniforms are all stained. Joe, also coaching a football team, spots Zulu biking, who is supposed to wash their uniforms. One of the teammates, Liam, is a recovering junkie, and Joe stops by to pick him up. Joe gathers more of the men, and later, they get cut off by a car suddenly, and the van is having a hard time moving. The driver is a woman, and Joe stops by to help her. The woman, Sarah, knows Joe, as she is a health inspector observing Liam and Sabine. The woman and Joe argue because she is supposed to check the couple as it is her schedule, but Joe doesn't listen to her because it's their practice day. Joe emphasizes it's an important day for a play. Joe mocks the woman a bit but then makes Liam promise to have another appointment. The woman is pissed. In the football field, the players play and start writing, with Joe diligently coaching them. Later, they see another team arrive at the field while they practice, and the other team's players appear more fit and talented compared to Joe's football boys. Joe complains to the referee about it, but the referee has nothing to do about it. Their complaint is that the other team has the same uniform color theme as them, and it will be confusing, which is discerning, actually, because Joe's team has moldy shirts. The referee solves this by telling them to just strip off while having a play match. The game starts, but then Joe's team is complaining because the opposite team is pulling down their shorts. Joe scolds Mojo and tells him to get over it. So the game continues, but Joe's team is losing. The two men argue again. Back at home, Sarah checks up on Sabine and their son. She advises Sabine on what to do with the son, suggesting spending time on crafting. Sabine mentions that Joe buys books for Liam's son, and they read to him. Sabine asks the social worker if she has kids, but Sarah says she had hundreds since she was a social worker before leaving. Joe drops off his team one by one until Liam is left with him. Liam seems to have a problem, so Joe encourages him to open up. Liam confesses his issues with Sabine, and Joe motivates him to pull himself together to avoid going back to being a junkie. Liam admits how challenging it is. Later on the way, Liam spots the McGowan boys and confronts them. The men, being big and intimidating, warn Liam off. Joe observes the situation but doesn't intervene. He continues driving and notices Ms. Sarah struggling with her belongings falling from the trunk. Joe stops to help her out. Joe asks a personal question about how long she has been running the wallpaper and papers business. Sarah is engaged in sending off surveys, and Joe offers to help with the wallpapers. In an attempt to ease Sarah's stress, Joe writes down his number, clearly flirting with her. Finally, she introduces herself as Sarah before sliding into the car. The next day, Joe and his buddy, Shanks, search for Sarah's address and assist her with the wallpaper project, bringing along a ladder and tools. However, Shanks lacks experience in putting up wallpaper. Despite this, they proceed with the task, but Sarah requests the wallpaper on the ceiling. Joe and Shanks argue that Sarah's idea is impossible and futile. Shanks embellishes the lie by suggesting that it would have a rustic look if left without wallpaper. They decide to paint over the area. Sarah buys into their reasoning, thinking they are both experts, unaware of their deception. Joe and Shanks loudly sing in the living room while Sarah prepares tea and brings biscuits. As they continue working, Shanks notices a man with a big camera taking photos of Sarah's apartment. Joe recognizes him as one of the social workers monitoring him. Joe, fearing a violation of his welfare benefits, chases him down. The social worker, scared, slips inside his car. Joe confronts him, almost destroying the car and hurling curses. He proceeds to vandalize the car and paint over the social worker. The social worker threatens to sue him and flees. Sarah and Shanks witness Joe's violent tendencies and breakdowns. Joe comes back up to Sarah's apartment and begins pasting the wallpaper on the walls. Shanks warns Joe of the potential consequences, such as facing court and jail time. Sarah enters, offering food. Shanks hypes up Joe to Sarah, even with his butt crack showing. Joe and Sarah seem to hit it off well as they converse, with Joe making Sarah laugh. They dine together over wine and pizza, guessing songs and bands as a game. In the middle of the fun, Sarah receives a call, but it's inaudibly clear. Joe observes that Sarah looks happy talking to the person on the phone. He notices photos of Sarah's parents in the kitchen, realizing they are no longer around. Curious about Joe's family, Sarah sees a photo of his team, whom he considers his family. Sarah offers a toast to Joe, but he refuses due to his ongoing Alcoholics Anonymous journey. Sarah understands and apologizes for being nosy, but Joe is fine with it. Joe gets up, noticing the time, and thanks Sarah. Sarah, realizing that Joe has never hung up wallpaper before, expresses concern about what he will do with the social worker. However, Joe remains confident. Sarah pays him before he exits the building. Later, Joe enjoys playing chess with Shanks, who suggests that Joe should ask Sarah out. However, Joe expresses concern about the high cost of dining out these days. With no car, job, or house, he feels he can't afford to date, especially considering he's already 38 and lacks stability in life. Shanks fishes out some money and gives it to Joe for a date. Later, Joe is called in for questioning about breaking his welfare policies, with photos captured by the social worker showing him painting the car. Sarah later testifies that Joe has done work in the house, but no payments are made, and it's more of a personal favor, which lets Joe off. Joe goes to see Sarah at her workplace, the health center. The receptionist, Maggie, tells him she's busy, but then recognizes Joe and instructs him to wait by the door. Joe sneaks in while Sarah is working. Sarah is teaching new mothers how to wash their babies' privates. She notices him and asks for 2 more minutes. Joe runs out of the building, and Sarah follows. Joe thanks Sarah for saving him from future trouble. Joe then asks Sarah out to go bowling, but Sarah says she'll think about it and call him later. But Sarah tells Maggie that he is not going bowling with Joe because, aside from not knowing how to bowl, Sarah is utterly turned off by Joe since he is wildly unpredictable. The receptionist encouragingly tells her that it's not like she has to be an expert bowler to go and just give it a shot. Joe goes 10-pin bowling anyway with Sarah, and they both enjoy the time. Joe happily teaches Sarah on how to play. After the bowling date, Sarah and Joe head up to her apartment. Despite Joe's refusal, Sarah insists on inviting Joe for a cup of tea, but he eventually declines and leaves for the night. Later, Sarah persists and gives Joe taxi money. Despite Joe's initial refusal, Sarah convinces him to accept the money. They engage in a playful back and forth about the funds until Sarah's door automatically shuts and locks. Realizing the situation, Sarah finds herself locked out with her keys inside. Having no luck busting the door open, Joe brainstorms a solution, but Sarah chooses to sleep in her own car for the night. Undeterred, Joe suggests that Sarah stays at his place. Although hesitant, Sarah eventually agrees after Joe reassures her that it isn't a come-on and that he won't take advantage of her. Joe offers her the bedroom, while he takes the couch for the night. Joe ensures Sarah's safety while at his place, and Sarah agrees to stay. As they drive to Joe's small and messy apartment, he attempts to make her feel comfortable. Joe changes the sheets for Sarah, who then requests a cup of tea. Joe gladly prepares it for her. Sarah, wanting some background music, asks Joe to start a music cassette. She selects classical music from inside, setting the tone for the evening. While Sarah explores Joe's apartment and gazes out the window at some teenage boys drinking, she notices framed news articles about Joe's team, which only won once. Joe returns, joining Sarah as they listen to music and drink tea. The atmosphere reminds Joe of his wild days when he stole a bundle of cassettes, sold them at a pub for alcohol, and managed to evade the cops. When Sarah asks what made Joe stop drinking, he hesitates, fearing she might hate him for the truth. However, Sarah reassures him that she doesn't mind, encouraging Joe to open up. Joe lights his cigarette and begins to share his story. There's a girl he used to drink with, named Rona. They had an on and off relationship, described as somewhat hellish and seemingly destined for disaster, though they loved each other. They do argue a lot but never gotten physical. However, Joe recalls the happier times they spent together, often drinking, including one instance when they drive along the beach. One night, under the influence, they return home but find themselves locked out. Frustrated and angry, Joe attempts to unlock the door while Rona laughs at him. In a fit of rage, Joe brutally beats up Rona, shocking Sarah with the revelation. Joe admits to having blackouts during these episodes, unable to remember the nights but is haunted by the knowledge that he has hurt Rona. This realization led Joe to feel shame and self-disgust, pushing him to the point of not wanting to live. The turning point in Joe's life came when he decided to attend Alcoholics Anonymous, and since then, he hasn't had a drop of alcohol. Sarah empathetically asks if Joe has forgiven himself, expressing understanding. As they prepare to sleep, Sarah comes to Joe. They share a kiss, and Joe, overwhelmed, suddenly cries. Sarah comforts him, shushing away his pain. The next day, Shanks and Joe are coaching the team. In a corner, however, Liam is being beaten by the same intimidating men. Joe intervenes to stop the beating, and the men retreat. Despite intervening, Joe is suspicious of Liam's sobriety, and questions if he is still clean from Liam assures him that he hasn't touched. At the health center, Sabine visits while smoking, and Maggie keeps telling her to put the cigarette out. Sabine picks an argument because she doesn't want to extinguish it. Sarah is attending to a couple holding their baby. She teaches the man how to hold the baby. The man, however, is concerned about their baby. But Sarah assures them it is okay and then advises the mother with a quick fix. Sarah overhears the argument outside. Maggie has already called for help, but Sabine can't calm down and keeps resisting. The receptionist gets Sabine's bag and discovers she has stolen a prescription pad from the doctor. The doctor tells her no more prescriptions for Sabine. Sarah tells Sabine off while she is being escorted out. Sarah tells the doctor that they need to talk about it because Sarah puts a lot of effort into fixing that family. Liam later surfs through the channels waiting for Sabine. Sabine arrives home, and Liam confronts Sabine about what she's up to and finds condoms in her sack. Liam doesn't use them, so he is very angry, knowing that Sabine is sleeping with other men and starts using again. Liam is mad, especially because Sabine is nonchalant about it and doesn't care Liam is losing his mind. Liam is upset that once Sabine is off the rails again, they will lose their son Scott again. Sabine doesn't seem to really care, and Liam gets increasingly frustrated, even when Liam pulls her hair to get her reflection checked in the front mirror. Later, Joe waits for Sarah, and obviously, they are already in a romantic relationship. Sarah suggests stopping by Liam and Sabine's because of the other day's events when Sabine started a commotion. Joe asks Scott about his parents, and the kid says Liam has been crying. Joe finds Liam around the house but discovers Sabine with a syringe of getting high. Joe takes that syringe, but Sabine pleads to give it back. It takes a bit of convincing and arguing before Joe hesitantly helps Sabine get shot. Joe asks Sabine where Liam is, and Sabine spits that the McGowans has gotten Liam. So Joe races out, telling Sarah what has happened, and is on a quest to find Liam. He goes running around the city and finds the hideout where they are staying. Joe goes up to where the men are playing pool, particularly at McGowan's headquarters. Joe and McGowan used to know each other, as McGowan is a Joe and the boys engage in a hard confrontation. Joe takes McGowan for a conversation and asks where Liam is. McGowan tells Joe that Liam owes him a lot of money and won't let him go until Liam pays what he owes. Joe tries to handle it diplomatically, but McGowan refuses to listen. McGowan points out where Liam is. Liam is at the corner and has decided to work for McGowan to be done with it. Liam has stopped using, but he still owes money amounting to 500 quid. Additionally, Sabine owes them 15 quid from dealing. While Liam is inside, Sabine continues dealing until she starts using them herself, accumulating more debt. Liam reveals that the deal is to pay back the money, or Sabine will be forced to work on the streets. Liam didn't tell Joe about it out of respect and shame. Sabine is already hooked on their and Liam wants to save her. The third threat is that McGowan will break Liam's legs. Joe angrily approaches McGowan, warning him not to touch Sabine or Liam, or something will happen. McGowan calms him down, and they have a more civilized conversation. Joe warns McGowan that if he touches Sabine or Liam, there will be consequences. To settle the matter once and for all, McGowan tells Joe to transport for him in exchange for Liam's freedom. However, Joe doesn't want to agree to it. Joe takes Liam home to Sabine, and Sarah is there. Sarah and Joe leave. Along the way, McGowan lies, assuring that everything else is sorted, so no worries. Joe cooks dinner at Sarah's home. Joe checks Sarah out, and she's wearing only a bathrobe. Before dinner, Joe and Sarah decide to have appetizers first. They both become playfully intimate. Joe goes by the dock and waits for a call from one of McGowan's men by the payphone. Joe has accepted McGowan's offer to transport the man instructs him to go near a bed and breakfast and gives other instructions for the task to take a car key. Joe goes to the bed and breakfast and gets the key. He tries to unlock the car, but it sets off the alarm, attracting attention. The man from the rentals tells him to read the instruction manual, but actually, there's a button on the key remote. The man asks for the registration number because it might be a robbery, and Joe sarcastically says he has 2 deceased bodies in the boot of the car. The man tells him to dispose of the bodies then. Joe starts driving while remembering a conversation with Shanks. Shanks is pissed off at Joe for accepting it and says it's very dangerous. Joe assures him it's only 2 jobs and it's fine. Joe has to drive up north to Glasgow. Shanks calls it BS because are not known for integrity and don't really hold up their end of the bargain, and he fears that it's not just 2 jobs, but they will keep Joe forever. Joe wants to help Liam and Sabine get sorted out of this trouble. Shanks, though very angry, tells him not to do it. Joe asks Shanks to trust him. While traveling, he stops for a while after a long trip transporting a man in a kilt playing a bagpipe is the center of attraction. The next scene shows Joe and Sarah taking a romantic, leisurely walk along the bridge. They stop for a while, and Joe tells Sarah to close her eyes. Joe gives Sarah a set of earrings, and Sarah is very pleased with it, so she wears it. But there's another surprise, and he asks Sarah again to close her eyes. The next box contains a ring. However, this time Sarah is not pleased. She asks why, but Joe just says that he loves Sarah. Sarah mentions they have only been together for a couple of weeks and doesn't want the ring as it symbolizes a lot of commitment. She is displeased at Joe for not understanding her. Joe wonders what he has done wrong and doesn't understand why Sarah is acting that way. Sarah walks away, and Joe chases her. Sarah says Joe has ruined it and runs away. Joe throws away the ring into the river. At home, Joe is writing and listening to music, concentrating, when suddenly someone knocks on the door. It is Sarah. At first, they don't speak, and Sarah is about to leave, but Joe tells her to stay. Joe prepares tea for Sarah. Joe comments on how good the earrings look on Sarah and jokes about throwing the whole ring away, saying he doesn't want to talk about it. Sarah laughs and hugs Joe, and their relationship amends. It's a coaching session, and Joe drives the whole football team. However, Joe loses the path, so the boys start telling him where to go. Joe angrily accepts the instructions. Later, he stops by the garage and truck of a sports store, and the boys get out, stealing boxes of merchandise while locking up the garage gate and truck door. Joe is utterly surprised at their crime and is more worried about Liam. The boys get back with the stolen loot and drive away, using Joe as a getaway driver. In the field, the soccer team dresses up in their new Brazilian uniform, which the other coach says does not seem right because it is Brazilian. However, Joe defends it, stating that it is fine. In the health center, Sarah calls Maggie and shows her a series of pregnancy wands, all of which are positive. Maggie realizes it's not from patients but is actually Sarah's. Sarah is teaching health education classes and pregnancy courses, but she slips up. Sarah feels weird but is happy about the upcoming bundle of joy. Sarah meets up with Sabine and Liam in a park, and Sabine accidentally spills the beans about Joe's fib, claiming he settled things with McGowan. Sarah has doubts because it involves a hefty sum. Liam adds to the confusion by stating that Joe merely arranged for an extension on their payments. Sarah calls him out for dishonesty. Liam attempts damage control, asserting that Sabine is unreliable, attempting to shield the truth. However, Sarah can't shake off what she has learned. She goes to Joe's place and asks him for more details about his dealings with McGowan, sharing her worries. Joe says nothing happened between him and McGowan. Sarah questions if he borrowed money from McGowan or others, and Joe keeps denying it, saying he only begged to let Liam off. Sarah accepts the lie, though it's not entirely okay. Out of the blue, Liam shows up, not knowing Sarah is inside. He warns Joe about Sarah's questions. Sarah gets angry, realizing Joe is lying and involved in dealings by driving cars with Joe insists that he is not as cozy and tidy as Sarah. Because he has no job himself and no other way out to help Liam, he resorts to this. Otherwise, Liam might perish, and Sabine will be thrown out and exploited. Sarah asks where Joe got the money for expensive earrings and rings, and Joe confesses McGowan gave him advance money. Disgusted, Sarah is about to leave, but Joe stops her against the wall. Sarah reminds Joe of his past actions with his former lover and asks if he will beat her up too. Joe lets Sarah go, and she runs out of the building crying out. Joe calls Shanks, but he's busy and leaves a voicemail. After that, Joe visits Liam's flat and offers him money to leave town, stating that he won't complete the second job for McGowan. However, Liam can't accept the money and fears the consequences since McGowan will come after both of them. Joe emphasizes that he's not responsible for Liam anymore. Following this, he goes to Sarah's place and tries to ask Sarah back, but Sarah doesn't want to see him again. At McGowan's snooker hall, Joe declares that he won't complete the job. McGowan dismisses him, warning that he must finish the promised job, or something will happen to Liam. Joe pleads but is unsuccessful. McGowan attempts to have Joe thrown out by one of his thugs. When one of McGowan's thugs makes disrespectful comments about Sarah, Joe explodes in anger and mercilessly beats all of McGowan's men with a bat. He chases after them and smashes McGowan's car as he is spiraling out of control. Realizing he is done for good, Joe takes home liquor and breaks years of sobriety to start drinking. Later, Liam finds Joe heavily drunk, and his door is left wide open. Liam panics and shares with Joe that McGowan's men are on their tail. However, Joe, in his intoxicated state, directs insults at Liam for not running away like Joe has instructed, and refuses to budge. Liam, worried about Joe's safety, plans to flee with Scott, leaving Sabine behind. In his drunken stupor, Joe continues berating Liam, expressing frustration for not leaving and that Joe has done everything he can. Under the influence, Joe inadvertently hints to Liam to take drastic measures. Sabine contacts Joe's landline, notifying him that McGowan is lurking outside their residence. She advises Liam against returning, warning that harm awaits him. Joe, already asleep, remains oblivious while Liam witnesses McGowan's crew attempting to breach Joe's apartment. With no viable alternatives, Liam finds a rope, ties it around his neck, and leaps out of the window while the thugs witness it. Joe wakes up and quickly tries to hoist him back up, but his intoxicated state hinders any successful rescue. The thugs flee, and Liam meets an instant demise, leaving Joe in tears, unable to save Liam. Liam is laid to rest, accompanied by Sabine, Scott, Joe, and Sarah. Following the depressing funeral, Joe encounters Sarah, and they walk together.